Now, is finance a good major to study? That's what I'm going to answer on this video. Now, a lot of people have asked me, oh, I'm thinking about going to university. I know you are an owner of a financial company. Would you see it as a good thing? If somebody was studying finance and wanted to go into your industry. Now, the short answer is no, but the long answer is it depends. Now, to let you know something about myself, I went to business school, in Manchester, in the UK, and I didn't like it at all in general. And the reasons were fairly simple. And it was crystal clear that the academics at business school, and indeed what I would call the dictatorship of the prevailing orthodoxy, were completely taken by surprise by almost every single event that happened in the world. So whether that was the economic crisis of 2008, 2009, or smaller crisis, a lot of their risk management tools simply weren't working. So business school can be very good for certain kinds of finance. Let's say you just want to be an accountant, you're just doing something which is purely technical. You don't have to think. I'm not implying that accountants never have to think outside the box, but you know what I mean. You're just doing something which is more on the technical aspects, narrow and deep, because obviously there's many different finance specializations. With something like that, I think business school is fine. Let's say you wanted to study accountancy. You just want to study management accounting or financial accounting, whatever. Then, business school has its place, even though, of course, a lot of the big four accounting firms and others, they employ people who have different majors. Indeed, I have a couple of friends who have studied things like art, psychology, whatever, and they've ended up at PwC or big four accounting firms. And of course, right now in the UK at least, but also some other countries, the university you went to and the grade you got is more important than what you studied. If you're going to get a first class degree in art or law from Oxford, you're more likely to be able to get into a big financial company or even a startup compared to getting a third in finance from a so-called lesser university, for example. However, another point to make about finance degrees is they don't really focus on, say, wealth management, and they can be very prescribed in terms of what they teach. So I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in my upcoming video, where I'm going to talk about risk management versus risk per se. But on a lot of finance courses, a lot of the things they say are just not true at all. I was reading a good article by Warren Buffett, and also I was reading watching a video by his business partner, Charlie Munger. And they both laughed at something. They said 50 or 60% of the stuff taught at business school is complete hogwash. And the funny thing is, business schools teach things that are self-evidently not true. I'll give you an example. This idea that people are these kind of rational utility maximizers. Anyone who knows anything about human nature and has had any kind of life experience knows that human nature is more emotional than it is rational. We can all be like that, right? Think about it, right? If somebody had just killed your family member yesterday and they offered you £1 million or dollars, the rational thing would be to take the money, but of course hardly anyone would do it because of emotion. That's an extreme example, but we see it time and time again that people are willing to do emotional things rather than rational things. Likewise, when it comes to risk relative to return, the traditional portfolio theory taught at universities is that basically volatility equals risk. But it doesn't. I mean, I'll put the article below I was referring to before with Buffett. He was making the point that actually bonds can increase, not decrease, increase risk if you're a long-term investor. And he's absolutely right. Just focusing on standard deviation or volatility and saying that's risk alone is simply not true. And if you look at all the titans of investing, whether you're talking about John Bogle, the founder of Vanguard, Buffett and his business partner Munger, they don't believe that at all, that volatility equals risk. The idea that just something's volatile, that means it's risky, and if something's kind of stagnant, it's not risky. It's simply not true. And this isn't just in finance, by the way. It's a bit like when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1989, 1990, a lot of people said, oh, how is this so? They have such a stable government. But of course, what they meant is a non-volatility government, a non-volatile government. And if you read the book by Nassim Taleb, I'm going to talk more about him in the next video where he talks about black swan events and whatever. Taleb makes a very strong argument that actually the more volatile a system is, whether in finance, in politics or any area, the more it gains from disorder, the more stable and secure it is long term. So I'll give you an example. Flying is the safest way of transport, statistically speaking. Every time there's a plane crash, the plane is taken away, examined. So the chances of a new plane crash are always lower. So in other words, the more plane crashes there are, the more it makes the system stable long term. So that volatility, let's say for example next week, there's an incredible amount of plane crashes. That would actually reduce the risk of further plane crashes because of the system, right? Or another example could be loads and loads of small companies are going to be more volatile for an economy than a big company. But obviously if a big company collapses, it's too big to fail. So the point I'm trying to make is a lot of these things the business school teach, and I've just given 2 examples here. For the people are rational and not always emotional, and volatility and stability are always linked, and volatility's risk are simply not true. And before somebody comes on and says, oh yes, but now alternative theories are taught, blah blah blah. Yes, that's very true, and there's a minority of universities which really encourage creative thinking and debates where you could have someone on one side of the fence who's saying, well, I think volatility is risk or can be. You've got another person debating, but that's not the way that most business schools actually work. At least that wasn't my experience, and it's not my experience from the typical business school type I've interviewed. In reality, often your granny might know more about risk in the practical world than the average regulator or the average finance PhD. And Taleb has also made that point himself, that basically so-called finance experts, self-appointed finance experts who work at universities, also in risk management or whatever, often they don't actually understand risk at all. So the point I would make though is it depends what you want to go into. If you just want to get a job as an accountant, business school might do it for you. But I think if you want to do something like, it could be running your own finance business, it could be going to wealth management, whatever you want to do, doing something which is more broad could actually be just as useful. For example, somebody who's studied even philosophy or something which is very abstract, I would actually much prefer to employ someone like that as opposed to a business school type. Because what I find with the business school type, again, I'm just generalizing here, I'm not talking about everyone, they're more likely to think in very rigid and regimented ways, whereas somebody who's been taught to question things is much more likely to actually be a good fit in the real world. And as a final comment, I would make another thing. When I was studying my first year as an undergraduate, basically it was happening during a period of financial crisis. And guess what? Almost all the business school lectures thought it would be a very shallow recession, or basically there wouldn't be any recession. Most of the students thought the same thing. In comparison, the average person I met in the street, or indeed some people studying art, philosophy and so on, more of them could see that particular crisis was going to be a recession. And I've seen that time and time again. People in the so-called bubble, they get themselves into these prescribed ways of thinking, and it doesn't actually always help them in the real world. So I think in the forthcoming years, business school has to change a lot. For me personally, I don't know if all employers would be the same as me, but I personally think business school is more of a negative than a positive. That's just my perspective. But I think there's also a lot of people out there who see the same thing that I see. Okay, everyone, I've got some really exciting news today. So for a couple of years now, many people have asked me, well, look, I can't afford your minimum investments, but I really like your advice. I don't know if you can do this or you can do that, or you can help me in that way, or you can't help me in that way. I've always said, no, I can only do this or that, but I've got some really exciting news, and that's that in a couple of months before the end of the year, I will be bringing out what I'm calling the Adam Fayed Academy, which will have many new areas which will be of interest to people. So things like mentoring, tutoring, all those kind of things that people have asked me for in the past. So stay tuned. I'm going to be announcing it in the next few months, but I thought I would tell it to you guys before. Let me know if there's anything in particular that you're looking for in this academy. We're going to be focusing on many different areas, including how to invest productively, also some business areas, because that's another thing people have asked me about before. So stay tuned, and I'll keep you up to date.